Welcome, dear friends, to a tale of friendship, loyalty, and redemption that spans decades and proves that even in the darkest of times, the bonds of true brotherhood can never be broken. Enjoy the story. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on Liberty Park as Jack Thompson and Mike Rodriguez stood before the towering war memorial. Both 18 and fresh out of high school, they were an unlikely pair. Jack, the all-American boy next door with dreams of becoming a doctor, and Mike, the scrappy foster kid with a fighter's heart. "So, this is it, huh?" Mike said, his voice gruff with emotion he'd never admit to. "Graduation's over, and real life begins." Jack nodded, clapping a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean we're going our separate ways. Listen, I've got an idea." Mike raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh boy, here we go. What brilliant plan has that big brain of yours cooked up now, future Dr. Thompson?" Jack laughed, shoving Mike playfully. "Shut up, you jerk. I'm serious. Let's make a pact. Every 4th of July, we meet right here at 1 p.m., no matter what. Deal?" Mike's smirk softened into a genuine smile. "Deal. Blood brothers forever, right?" They clasped hands, the gesture holding all the weight of their shared history, 10 years of friendship, of having each other's backs through thick and thin. As fireworks exploded overhead, painting the sky in bursts of red, white, and blue, neither boy could have imagined the twists and turns their lives would take, or how this simple promise would become a lifeline in the years to come. Life has a way of taking the best-laid plans and tearing them to shreds. For Jack and Mike, the years following high school were a whirlwind of change and challenge. Jack threw himself into his pre-med studies at State University, burning the midnight oil in pursuit of his dream. His days were a blur of lectures, labs, and library sessions, each test and paper bringing him one step closer to his goal. But even as he excelled academically, a shadow loomed over his success, his mother's failing health and the mounting medical bills that threatened to derail everything. "Mom, you need to see a specialist," Jack insisted one evening, watching his mother struggle to catch her breath after climbing the stairs. Linda Thompson waved off his concern with a weak smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little winded. We can't afford fancy doctors right now. Your education comes first." But Jack couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at him, the fear that he was running out of time. Mike's path was rockier from the start. The car accident that claimed his parents left him adrift in a system that seemed designed to break spirits rather than nurture them. Bounced from foster home to foster home, he finally landed with the Carters, a wealthy couple more interested in appearances than actual parenting. "We're sending you to Ridgemont Military Academy," Mr. Carter announced over dinner one night, his tone brooking no argument. "It'll teach you some discipline." Mike's fists clenched under the table, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. "Yes, sir," he ground out, knowing any protest would fall on deaf ears. That night, as he packed his meager belongings, Mike's thoughts turned to Jack. He wondered if his friend had any idea how different their lives had become. The boys' one constant refuge was Jonesy's gym, a no-frills boxing club that smelled of sweat and determination. Here, they could forget their troubles and lose themselves in the rhythm of the speed bag and the satisfying thud of fists against heavy bags. "You've got real talent, kid," Jonesy, the grizzled old trainer, told Mike one day as he watched him spar. "You could go pro if you wanted." Mike's eyes lit up at the praise, a fire kindling in his chest. For the first time in years, he dared to dream of a future that was his own. "You really think so, Jonesy?" The old man nodded, a rare smile cracking his weathered face. "I've been in this game longer than you've been alive, boy. I know talent when I see it, but it's going to take hard work, discipline. You up for that?" Mike's jaw set with determination. "I'm up for anything that gets me out of this town." But dreams, as both boys would learn, can be fragile things. 4 years passed in the blink of an eye. Jack, fresh out of college with his acceptance to medical school burning a hole in his pocket, stood on the familiar street corner where he and Mike had spent countless afternoons. But his friend was nowhere to be found. Worry gnawed at Jack's gut as he made his way to the imposing Carter residence. The manicured lawns and gleaming facade seemed a world away from the Mike he knew. Mrs. Carter answered the door, her perfectly coiffed hair and pearl necklace a stark contrast to the coldness in her eyes. "Yes, can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear that she had no intention of helping anyone. "I'm looking for Mike," Jack said, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. "Mike Rodriguez. Is he here?" Mrs. Carter's lip curled in distaste. "Mike? We haven't heard from him in years," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Probably off getting into trouble somewhere. Now, if you'll excuse me." The door slammed in Jack's face, leaving him more confused and concerned than ever. His next stop was their old high school, where he cornered their former classmate, Tommy, by the rusted bleachers where they used to hang out. "Mike? Oh man, last I heard he was out in Vegas," Tommy said, eyes darting nervously as if afraid someone might overhear. "There were rumors, you know. Underground fights, big money. But then, well, word is he hurt someone bad. Real bad. Might even be doing time." Jack's blood ran cold. This couldn't be the Mike he knew, the friend who'd stood by him through everything. "Are you sure, Tommy? This doesn't sound like Mike at all." Tommy shrugged, already backing away. "Hey man, I'm just telling you what I heard. Look, I gotta go. Good luck finding your boy." As Jack walked home that night, doubt crept in like a poisonous fog. The Mike he knew would never have gotten mixed up in something like that. But then again, how well did he really know Mike? People change, he thought bitterly. Maybe they'd both changed too much. Jack slumped at the kitchen table, the weight of the world on his shoulders. His mother, Linda, watched him with concern etched on her too pale face. The house was quiet, save for the whir of the oxygen machine that had become a constant backdrop to their lives. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked, reaching out to squeeze his hand. Her touch was frail, her skin paper-thin and bruised from countless IVs. Jack looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "Mom, I've been thinking about medical school, about our bills. I think I know what I need to do." Linda's brow furrowed, a coughing fit interrupting her before she could speak. When she caught her breath, she shook her head. "Jack, no. Whatever you're thinking, your education comes first. We'll figure something out." But Jack's mind was made up. He'd spent sleepless nights weighing his options, and he knew this was the only way. "I'm joining the Army, Mom, as a medic. They'll pay for my schooling, and the salary will help with your treatments." Tears welled in Linda's eyes, a mix of pride and heartbreak. "Oh, Jack, my brave, selfless boy. Are you sure about this? It's dangerous, and you've worked so hard to get into med school." Jack nodded, pulling his mother into a gentle hug, mindful of the tubes and wires that seemed to tether her to this earthly plane. "I'm sure, Mom, it's the right thing to do. And hey, maybe I'll even run into Mike out there somewhere." As he held her, Jack thought of Mike, wondering where his friend was and if he'd understand this choice. But some bonds, he told himself, were unbreakable. No matter where life took them, he and Mike would always be brothers. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Jack's thoughts raced. He was terrified, if he was honest with himself. Terrified of war, of leaving his mother, of putting his dreams on hold. But beneath the fear was a steely resolve. He would do this, for his mom, for his future, and maybe in some small way, for Mike too. 4 years of service had changed Jack in ways he never could have imagined. As he stepped off the bus in his hometown, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he felt like a stranger in his own skin. The familiar sights and sounds of Main Street washed over him, a balm to his battle-weary soul. He was so lost in thought, cataloging the changes and constants of his childhood home, that he almost missed the commotion up ahead. 2 men, clearly drunk and belligerent, were hassling a young woman outside the local diner. Jack's combat-honed instincts kicked in before he could even process the scene. "Hey!" he called out, dropping his bag and striding forward. "Leave her alone!" The larger of the 2 men turned, sneering. "Mind your own business, soldier boy," he slurred, puffing out his chest in a clear attempt at intimidation. But Jack was already moving. Years of training took over as he expertly disarmed and subdued both men, his movements fluid and precise. In a matter of seconds, both assailants were on the ground, groaning and disoriented. The young woman stared at him wide-eyed. "Thank you," she breathed, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I'm Emma Taylor." Jack smiled, feeling a spark of connection. "Jack Thompson. Nice to meet you, Emma." Suddenly, one of the men on the ground began to choke, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. Without hesitation, Jack knelt beside him, quickly assessing the situation. "He's choking on something," Jack muttered, positioning himself behind the man. With a swift, practiced motion, he performed the Heimlich maneuver. A peanut shot out of the man's mouth, and he gasped for air. Jack stepped back, his heart racing from the adrenaline. Emma looked at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You saved him, even after what he did. That was incredible." Jack shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It's what I'm trained to do. Listen, are you okay? Can I walk you home?" As they strolled down the twilight-bathed street, Jack felt a warmth spreading through his chest. Emma's easy laugh and quick wit reminded him of simpler times, of the life he'd left behind when he enlisted. "So, Jack Thompson, hometown hero," Emma said, bumping his shoulder playfully. "What brings you back to our sleepy little burg?" Jack's smile faltered for a moment. "Just got out of the army. Came home to see my mom, figure out next steps. I'm supposed to start medical school in the fall." Emma's eyes lit up. "A doctor? Wow, impressive. And here I thought you were just a pretty face with some fancy moves." They both laughed, the tension of the earlier incident melting away. For the first time in years, Jack felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Little did he know, fate had other plans in store. The pounding on the door jolted Jack from a deep sleep. He stumbled to answer it, his mother's worried voice calling out behind him. "Jack Thompson?" a gruff voice demanded as he opened the door. 2 police officers stood on his porch, their faces grim in the harsh porch light. "You're under arrest for aggravated assault and battery." Jack's mind reeled, sleep evaporating in an instant. "What? There must be some mistake." But before he could protest further, he was being cuffed and led to a waiting patrol car. As the door slammed shut, he caught a glimpse of his mother's terrified face in the window, her hand pressed against the glass as if she could reach through and pull him back. The next few days were a blur of confusion and mounting dread. Jack sat in a holding cell, trying to make sense of the charges against him. How had saving Emma from assault turned into this nightmare? When he finally faced the judge, the courtroom was a sea of somber faces and legal jargon. Jack sat at the defendant's table, still struggling to comprehend how things had gone so wrong so quickly. The prosecutor's voice dripped with disdain as he addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled by Mr. Thompson's military service. He viciously attacked 2 upstanding members of our community, nearly killing one of them. This kind of vigilante justice has no place in our society." Jack's court-appointed lawyer, a harried-looking man named Davidson, seemed overwhelmed and outmatched. His defense was lackluster at best, his arguments falling flat in the face of the prosecution's well-oiled machine. Even Emma's impassioned testimony about Jack saving her from harassment fell on deaf ears. "He's a hero," she insisted, her voice breaking. "Those men were harassing me. Jack saved me, and then he saved one of them when he started choking. How can that be a crime?" But the jury's faces remained impassive, and Jack felt his hope slipping away with each passing moment. As the judge read out the sentence, 2 years in state prison, Jack felt the ground drop out from under him. This couldn't be happening. He had plans, dreams. Medical school was waiting. His mother needed him. The last thing he saw before being led away was Emma's tear-stained face in the gallery, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry." Jack wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that he'd do it all again in a heartbeat, but the words stuck in his throat as the bailiff led him away. That night, in the cold confines of his cell, Jack stared at the ceiling and wondered how his life had unraveled so quickly. He thought of his mother, alone and sick, of Emma, probably blaming herself for his predicament. And for the first time in years, he thought of Mike, wondering if his old friend had faced a similar moment of despair. "I could really use you right now, brother," Jack whispered into the darkness, but only silence answered. The clang of the cell door echoed through the prison block, sealing Jack's fate. He stood rigid, eyes forward, determined not to show fear as catcalls and jeers erupted around him. "Fresh meat!" someone shouted, followed by cruel laughter that sent a chill down Jack's spine. Jack's cellmate, a mountain of a man covered in tattoos, rose from his bunk with a predatory grin. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he growled, cracking his knuckles ominously. Heart pounding, Jack prepared to defend himself. His military training had prepared him for combat, but this was different. This was survival. But before the situation could escalate, a familiar voice cut through the din like a knife. "Back off, Tiny. This one's with me." Jack's head snapped around, disbelief warring with recognition. There, larger than life, and radiating an aura of authority, stood Mike. The years had been both kind and cruel to his old friend. Mike's boyish features had hardened into chiseled planes, a scar bisecting one eyebrow. His body was a mass of lean muscle, testament to years of fighting both in and out of the ring. But his eyes, those were the same eyes that had shared 1,000 boyhood adventures. "Mike," Jack breathed, scarcely daring to believe it. A ghost of a smile played at Mike's lips. "In the flesh, brother. Looks like we've got some catching up to do." As the other inmates backed off, respecting Mike's clear status, Jack felt a mix of relief and trepidation. What twist of fate had brought them both here, and what did it mean for their future? Later that night, as the cell block quieted, Mike and Jack sat on their bunks, voices low as they filled in the gaps of their lost years. "I heard rumors about you in Vegas," Jack said hesitantly. "Underground fights." Mike's jaw tightened, a shadow passing over his face. "Yeah, I got in deep, too deep. Thought I could make it big, you know? But then—" He trailed off, his eyes haunted by memories he seemed reluctant to voice. Jack leaned forward, sensing the weight of Mike's unspoken words. "What happened, Mike?" Mike took a shaky breath, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "I hurt someone, Jack. Bad. Didn't mean to, but doesn't matter now. I'm paying for it. 5-year sentence." Jack's heart ached for his friend. This wasn't the future either of them had imagined on that sunny day in the park. "I'm sorry, Mike. I should have been there for you." Mike shook his head, a hint of his old smile returning. "Nah, man. You were out there living your dream, being a hero. Speaking of which, how the hell did you end up in here? Last I heard, you were headed to medical school." As Jack recounted his story, his mother's illness, his decision to join the army, and the disastrous homecoming that led to his arrest, Mike's expression darkened. "Corrupt cops, crooked politicians. Sounds like business as usual in this town," Mike growled, his fists clenching. "But don't worry, brother. We'll figure this out, together." For the first time since his arrest, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, he knew he could face it with Mike by his side. They were no longer the carefree boys who'd made a summer pact, but the bond between them was stronger than ever. As they settled in for the night, Jack's last thought before drifting off was of the War Memorial in Liberty Park. He wondered if it was still standing, a silent sentinel waiting for a reunion that might never come. Weeks passed in a monotonous blur of prison routines and watchful eyes. Jack, protected by Mike's fearsome reputation, slowly adjusted to life behind bars. But the injustice of his situation ate at him, a constant gnawing in his gut that no amount of bland prison food could satisfy. One day, Mike pulled Jack aside, his eyes darting around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Listen," he said in a low voice. "I've got a guy on the outside. A lawyer. He's the real deal, man. If anyone can get you out of here, it's him." Jack's heart leapt with hope, but caution tempered his excitement. "A lawyer? Mike, how can you afford—" Mike cut him off with a wry smile. "Let's just say I've made some connections in here. Don't worry about the cost. Your family, remember?" The next few months were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers and shocking revelations. The lawyer, a bulldog named Ramirez, dug deep into the case, uncovering a web of corruption that went all the way up to the district attorney's office. It turned out the 2 men Jack had confronted were the sons of prominent local politicians. They'd used their influence to railroad Jack's case, counting on his lack of resources to keep him behind bars, but they hadn't counted on Mike's determination or Ramirez's skill. When the truth came to light in a dramatic courtroom showdown, the case against Jack crumbled like a house of cards. "Your Honor," Ramirez thundered, brandishing a stack of documents. "I have here irrefutable evidence of witness tampering, prosecutorial misconduct, and a clear conspiracy to deprive my client of his constitutional rights. I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges and Mr. Thompson's immediate release." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Jack sat stunned, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. He caught Emma's eye in the gallery, saw the hope blooming on her face, mirroring his own. When the dust settled, the judge's gavel fell with a resounding crack. "In light of this new evidence, I have no choice but to vacate Mr. Thompson's conviction and order his immediate release. Furthermore, I am recommending a full investigation into the conduct of the district attorney's office and all parties involved in this gross miscarriage of justice." After 6 long months, Jack walked out of prison a free man. As he blinked in the bright sunlight, he saw 2 figures waiting for him, his mother and Emma, both with tears in their eyes. Jack's heart swelled with emotion as he embraced them. His mother felt frailer than he remembered, and guilt gnawed at him for the time he'd lost. Emma's hug was fierce, as if she could erase the past months through sheer force of will. But even as joy flooded through him, a pang of sadness hit. Mike was still inside, with years left on his sentence. "I'll be back for you, brother," Jack vowed silently as he looked back at the prison walls. "Whatever it takes." That night, as Jack lay in his own bed for the first time in months, his mind raced with plans. He had lost time to make up for, a medical career to salvage, and a debt to repay. But most of all, he had a friend to save. With newfound determination, Jack reached for his phone and dialed Ramirez's number. It was time to turn the tables once and for all. 2 years flew by in a whirlwind of change and new beginnings. Jack, with the help of Emma's unwavering support, had thrown himself into his medical studies. Now, in his 2nd year of residency, he was finally on the path he'd always dreamed of. The hospital corridors had become a second home. The long hours and demanding work a welcome challenge after the confines of prison. Jack thrived on the adrenaline of the ER, the satisfaction of helping people at their most vulnerable. But even as he reveled in his hard-won success, thoughts of Mike were never far from his mind. He had kept his promise, working tirelessly with Ramirez to appeal Mike's case. Progress was slow, but Jack refused to give up hope, which was why, when the doorbell rang on a lazy Sunday afternoon, Jack's heart nearly stopped at the sight of his old friend on the porch. "Mike!" he gasped, hardly daring to believe his eyes. Mike stood there, looking both familiar and strange. Gone was the hardened prison tough. In his place stood a man who seemed at peace. He was dressed in civilian clothes, a duffel bag at his feet, and a tentative smile on his face. "Hey, Jack," Mike said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I just got out last week and, well, you're the only family I've got." Without a word, Jack pulled Mike into a fierce hug. When they finally broke apart, both men's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Come in, you idiot," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "There's someone I want you to meet." As they entered the living room, Emma looked up from where she sat on the couch, cradling a small bundle in her arms. Her eyes widened in recognition, but she smiled warmly. "Mike, this is my wife, Emma," Jack said proudly. "And this little guy, this is Michael, your godson, if you want the job." Mike stared at the baby in awe, gently reaching out to touch his tiny hand. "Godfather? Me? Jack, are you sure?" Jack clasped Mike's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "There's no one I trust more, brother. What do you say?" As Mike held baby Michael, something shifted in his expression. The last traces of his hardened exterior melted away, replaced by a look of pure wonder. "I say, it would be an honor," Mike whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Both of you. This is more than I ever thought I'd have." As the afternoon wore on, Mike shared his plans for the future. He wanted to open a youth boxing program, to give kids the guidance and support he'd never had. "I want to keep them off the streets, you know," Mike explained, his eyes alight with passion. Show them there's a better way, that they have choices. Jack and Emma exchanged a glance, both impressed by Mike's determination to turn his life around. "It's amazing, Mike," Emma said, genuine admiration in her voice. "You're going to change so many lives." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the windows, Jack felt a sense of contentment he'd never known before. His family was whole, his friend was free, and the future stretched out before them, bright with promise. But the story wasn't over yet. Little did they know, fate had one more surprise in store. As they celebrated Mike's newfound freedom and Jack's growing family, the doorbell rang once again. Emma jumped up, balancing Michael on her hip. "Oh, that must be Sarah. I completely forgot she was coming over." As Emma went to answer the door, Jack leaned in close to Mike. "Sarah's a nurse at the hospital. She's Michael's godmother. And," he added with a conspiratorial wink, "she's single." Before Mike could respond, Emma returned with Sarah in tow. As introductions were made, the chemistry between Mike and Sarah was instant and electric. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Sarah, a petite blonde with kind eyes and a ready smile, seemed equally taken with Mike. As they chatted, their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by shared laughter and lingering glances. Later, as the evening wound down, Jack stood on the porch with Mike, both nursing beers and gazing at the star-filled sky. The night was warm, filled with the gentle chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. "You know," Jack said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never forgot our pact. Even when things were at their darkest, I held on to the hope that we'd meet again at that memorial." Mike nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Life had other plans for us, I guess. But maybe this is even better. We found our way back to each other, and now we've got this whole new family." Jack raised his bottle in a toast. "To family, the one we're born with, and the one we choose." As they clinked bottles, both men felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but here, in this moment, everything felt right. The next few months flew by in a blur of new experiences and deepening connections. Mike's youth boxing program took off, quickly becoming a haven for at-risk kids in the community. Jack excelled in his residency, his experiences giving him a unique empathy for his patients. And Mike and Sarah? Their whirlwind romance blossomed into something deep and lasting. By the time autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and red, Mike was down on one knee, a small velvet box in his hand. It was a crisp October afternoon when they all gathered in Liberty Park, near the war memorial where it had all begun. Jack and Emma stood with little Michael, now toddling on unsteady legs. Mike and Sarah, radiant with newlywed bliss, joined them, hands intertwined. As they stood there, surrounded by falling leaves and memories, Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. They had all been through so much: pain, loss, injustice, but they had emerged stronger, bound together by love and loyalty. "You know," Mike said, breaking the reflective silence, "we never did manage to meet here on the 4th of July like we promised." Jack laughed, shaking his head. "No, I guess we didn't. But you know what? I think we kept the spirit of that promise. We found our way back to each other, no matter what." Emma, who had been listening with a soft smile, suddenly spoke up. "Well, why don't we make a new tradition? Every year on this day, we all meet here, to remember where we've been and celebrate how far we've come." The idea was met with enthusiastic agreement. As they made their plans, laughing and talking over each other in their excitement, Jack took a moment to really look at the people around him. His wife, his son, his best friend, and the new additions to their unconventional family. He thought about the boys they had been, standing in this very spot years ago, making a pact they couldn't possibly understand the weight of. They had dreamed of becoming a doctor and a boxer, of changing the world in their own ways, and in a sense, they had achieved those dreams, though not in the way they had imagined. Life had thrown them curveballs, knocked them down, and tested their resolve. But it had also given them second chances, unexpected joys, and a bond that was truly unbreakable. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. The future stretched out before them, bright with promise and new beginnings, and whatever it might bring, they would face it together, as friends, as brothers, as family. In that moment, standing in the fading light with the people he loved most in the world, Jack knew that they had finally, truly, come home.